it says sharing is paused. I wonder if you can see my screen.
All is good. We can hear you and we can see.
Great. Okay. So I thank you so much, Tina. It's great to see you again. Great to see everyone again. I wanted to update, just to give an update of what we've done since last year. We published this picture of the ecosystem of the Facebook ecosystem. Hopefully you can see my slide. Tell me if you can't see the slide. And it was basically looking across the Facebook ecosystem, 100 million people.
So we don't see a slide beyond the title slide.
But you saw the title slide?
I think this is the first.
Yeah, this is the first slide. That's the second slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we wanted to deep dive into this. Of course, what a year to deep dive into this. Every red dot is a community that is quote unquote anti-vax. Every blue dot is a community that is quote unquote pro-vax. Could be a public health, local, national, or global. Every green dot is something like pets, pet communities, parents. People who are interested in local schools, people who are not really interested in the vaccine debate, or who are not interested in the vaccine debate, but have somehow got entangled, have had...
Sorry, Neil, I think we may need to just unzoom and just look at your slides, because we still see just the start, but we don't see the network map.
I'm out of presentation mode.
Yeah, maybe you need to just come out of presentation mode and just present in a less pretty way.
There we go.
Perfect. Now we see.
Great. Okay, great. I'm so sorry about that. And the greens are communities of pet lovers, parents, school associations, everything you can imagine, other than worrying about attacking vaccines, attacking public health messaging. That's what we had last year. And so the question is, well, what happened during 2020 and what is happening now? So that's what I want to share with you. One of the things, since we take this system level view of the entire ecosystem, we can answer questions that maybe other approaches cannot. And I just want to take you through the 5 things that we can answer here in my 8 minutes left. Number one is, it's really interesting to see during this year where moderators have actually missed communities. I mean, which segments are missing from having CDC messaging, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very interesting that if we look in, we zoom in on that entire ecosystem. Basically, Facebook has done the equivalent of throwing kind of arrows, shooting arrows, throwing darts at the center of this universe. And what it's missed is these entire sets of communities, of which are, you're looking at ones, the dark ones are ones that have been targeted. The lighter ones, which are all the greens and most of the blues and many of the reds, are ones that have not. So they have not received targeted messaging, CDC messaging, et cetera, et cetera. And there are entire communities of communities that have are focused towards, for example, parenting or illnesses, et cetera. Just move that around there, that have been missed. So I want to zoom in on that for the moment. First of all, what is the shift in that entire ecosystem during this year? Well, last year, just as COVID was hitting in December, this is what that looked like. And on the bottom right, I haven't got time to go through it, it's all the segments, all the individual audience segments of the individual undecided, in other words, the kind of the communities that are embroiled with anti-vax, but are really not saying they're anti-vax. They break down into all sorts of categories: movements, illnesses, parents, conspiracies related to chemtrails, et cetera, et cetera. This is where they're situated. And if I flip to the end of 2020, and if I do this quickly enough and you can see it, just about see it on the screen, you can see that this thing has actually kind of tightened up. This entire ecosystem has tightened up. And so the question is, well, what does that mean in terms of how messages have passed across the ecosystem? And what are the key communities holding this thing together? What's the glue? What are the communities that are gluing together the local, national, global, 100 million people that are embroiled in the vaccine debate and COVID misinformation? On this slide, I show how as the community, as this ecosystem became more, just get this thing running, as this ecosystem became more tighter, it bound together, it's almost like a chemical bond. It enabled misinformation to spread, also positive information, but here you're looking at misinformation about COVID spreading throughout the early weeks. This is a week-by-week judgment analysis. This is why it's so hard to get answers as to, does false information spread differently from true information? Which spreads more quickly and what can you, it's all sorts of answers. The details here, we could talk a couple of hours just about these slides. But the problem is that it's complex. But the point is it passes on roadways and among communities that are bound together. So it's not so much the actual material that's passing, it's how those communities in the ecosystem are bonded together. And it's really interesting, this is getting onto the next angle that our analysis this year of the ecosystem has shown, is what are then those key audience segments for spreading that misinformation? Of course, if you go in and look at individual misinformation, you're probably going to find it's like doing a case study. Here we're looking at the entire ecosystem. And so what you see here is I've zoomed in on, if I just show here, I've zoomed in on one region of this entire Facebook ecosystem, which has, as I said, about 100 million people. And I'm zooming in on a region which was not targeted by Facebook, did not get public health messages. And if we look at this on first sight, when I just zoom in on the left panel, you might think there's a whole set of pink here are, I mean, they're all green communities, but I'm just running out of colors. So the pink ones here are communities of people online who are not really, they're not talking about COVID per se. They're talking about chemtrails, they're talking about 5G networks, they're talking about other conspiracies that have been around for a while. The green here, shown here, are ones that are really targeted towards food, GMO food, genetically modified foods, etc. And the black communities shown here, the color black here, are in some sense all of us, the parent communities. These are the ones that are interested in kids soccer, they're ones that are associated with schools, their school activities, their parenting communities, how to raise your kids, what happens if your kid has this, your kid has that. These are the communities shown here. And at first sight, it looks like the bonding that has happened between end of 2000, in other words, during COVID, looks like it was pulled together by the kind of GMO. I mean, if you're looking at this in a kind of chemistry test, you'd say, oh, it's the GMO communities and the existing conspiracy communities that have pulled themselves together closer to the parents. But that's not true. Actually, there was another set of communities, which I didn't show in the previous slide, which are the alternative health. And so what our analysis does is enable us to go in and drill down at the granular level of exactly what angles of alternative health have provided the key conduits of information, misinformation, that are worrying the parents. And remember, the mainstream parents, I mean, it's all of us. Parents have kids, kids have to go and have vaccines, parents have parents, if they're still alive, and they had to go and have vaccines. So parents have a very influential role. I'm just zooming in on parent sector here, just for the purposes of the discussion. And what we found of an analysis of 2020 is of that entire ecosystem, there are two key pieces of misinformation machinery that controlled all of the misinformation that we see across those 100 million people. And that is, number one, the alternative health off to one side. They're kind of above, sitting above the parents. And then within the reds, within the anti-vax, there's this core of a few low profile communities, in the sense they don't actually have that many members, but they're incredibly highly connected. Doesn't mean they're hubs, it just means they have a high betweenness in terms of the community. They're like conduits. They're also connected into other platforms, et cetera, et cetera. What does this mean? What does this give us? Well, this gives us an angle on understanding the tipping points in intent. So if I now take a block form of what I was previously showing with the 100 million, with all those different communities, all those different blobs, each of which is a community, and we block them together into communities, we can begin to see the influence. And these numbers here are links at the level of one community to another. It's a community that has purposely linked itself into another community because it wants information from them. It's going to get feed from them. All its members, 20,000, 2 million, will get feed from that other community. And so by now having numbers for the links between these different segments of the audience, of the audience that were not targeted by, they're not getting other information from public health, already showed that they lay outside that target area. We can begin to model and understand what their tipping points will be in the future. I haven't got time to go through all that detail. But Facebook, of course, is just one platform. People have said that. Fantastic talks today, by the way, everyone. We look at this same thing across platforms. So imagine this across platforms up to, even including Discord, anything where communities can form. And the communities can form around radio, they can form around TV, they can form around anything. And we see how they connect into each other. And that gives us an idea of that entire ecosystem, which we call a multiverse. Sorry, I'm a physicist, so I have to use words that I permit my limited vocabulary. So what this gives us is an analysis that effectively includes more than 1 billion people. It's all languages, countries, and platforms. It tells us what moderators are missing. It's telling us about shifts, the bonding in the entire online community, online world, multiverse, from local, national, and we can localize this down, local, national, global. Shifts in that, how the spreading then occurs, which segments are the key ones that are missing, and the ones we're bonding. There's no point targeting communities that are not holding together. I mean, of course, in an ideal world you would, but you really want to know which are the key ones in terms of the glue holding together the whole, the entire population of the planet in some sense. So my last 3 points, this is beyond sentiment analysis. This isn't based on just looking at keywords, and it's also beyond any kind of AI machinery, because what we're doing here is really generating, you have data, you have machine, some kind of, I call it machine learning, some kind of algorithmic approach, but you also need generative models. You could never build a picture of the solar system just on machine learning. It needs to have some kind of structure behind it. So we build these generative models that make them this triangle for understanding the system. And it's beyond social listening in the sense that we're not just listening to what has been said, we're looking at the structure of the communities about what they will likely say, what they might say, what could happen when version 2.0, 3.0 of the different vaccines then comes out. Okay, with that, thank you so much.
Neil, thank you very much for this update. I think your team absolutely deserves one of the commendations for working towards fulfillment of the grand challenges of the public health research agenda for infodemic management that we formed last summer, because these were the hard questions that we were grappling and identifying as knowledge gaps in understanding the analytical approach to being able to understand this such complex problem. And in a very short amount of time, I think you've really laid out and showed how it's possible to, like you say, you go beyond the actual computational method and you really look at the multiverse, which, by the way, my sons would be very happy to with us naming something like this going forward. So really thank you for your work and also for presenting this. So